Hi, and welcome back to the Shane Plays Out of the Abyss Notes series as I continue DMing and my intrepid party keeps working their way through the Underdark in the Out of the Abyss adventure as madness and demon lords and all kinds of craziness add to the already very dangerous area or region, world really underneath the world that is the Underdark. So I'm going to try to make this video shorter than normal. One, because it's taken me almost a week to record from last week's session. It's been busy. Plus, you may have noticed if you've subscribed to my channel, I pushed out a review of Storm King's Thunder, the new 5th edition adventure above ground with giants and all that stuff. And between working on the actual blog post for that, reading the book, prepping, recording the video, and also real life, that took a lot of my time. So my memory is probably not going to be as great on this previous session as it usually is. I usually try to record within a day or two if possible. So I'm just going to try to hit some highlights that I remember. Basically, the party made it to Neverlight Grove. And the way I described it, because the book really makes a point of there's a beauty, there's a sense of rest with Neverlight Grove. What I had is between Stool, the myconid sprout that's been with them as an NPC since the beginning of the adventure, since they escaped Valkenvelve, and Shushar, their Kuatoa guide. They were able to find the grove because once you get close enough, the myconid kind of homes in on it, almost like a homing pigeon or a salmon spawning or something. Just knows where to go. So, I described as sort of a drawing tunnel riverbed kind of thing that leads into the grove. Would normally be hard to find. There's only one way in. And here's how I described it, because the book really describes the beauty and the sense of rest of Neverlight Grove. It's one of the few places in the Underdark where you just show up and you go, this feels nice. Even though, as with every other place in the Underdark, with the demon lords on the rise and the madness infecting everything, of course, it's not safe here either. But at the beginning, it seems very, And my cat just knocked over my. You see him moving back there? That's one of my cats. Anyway, cats will be cats. So anyway, so they show up and it's one of the few places that feels safe. And the way I described it was, I read the flavor text from the book, obviously, right? But I also, I kind of took it a step further and said, okay, imagine, the feeling of safety and that you get from Rivendell, but with the nighttime illuminated beauty of Lothlorien, but yet with all like mushrooms and fungus and underground. And that was kind of how I described it. And the group seemed to get it. So, I said, don't take this too literally, but that's just kind of, it's got that kind of surrealistic nighttime beauty of Lothlorien, but it's got the homey, safe feeling of Rivendell. And every, because you can see up to the ceiling, and then you can see all throughout the grove, and then off in the distance you kind of see this giant mushroom tower looming in the mist, which will come very much into play before Neverlight Grove is over. So that's how I described it. So I hope that I did a good job of that with my players. I wasn't trying to imply they showed up in Rivendell, and I don't think they got that point. I don't think that's what they misunderstood me to say. Now, another thing that came up almost immediately, they're like, okay, we're here, what do we do? And they were like, well, we need to go in, but they were like, what about Globagool? Because Glob, the gelatinous cube, the sentient gelatinous cube came with them. And he, there was it, I guess, for a gelatinous cube. There was a lot of discussion over, will he harm the fungus? And it basically says in the monster manual that gelatinous cubes dissolve living tissue. So, I did a quick read through of the monster manual. I think I maybe searched online really quick. But I finally came in, I said, well, living tissue and vegetable and plants, that's somewhat living tissue, right? So I just ruled that, yes, he would dissolve fungus and plants and all that. So, and if somebody else out there knows for sure what that is on gelatinous cubes, feel free to leave a comment in the video. I'd appreciate that. So what the party decided to do was uh, 2 or 3 people go in on an initial sort of exploratory scouting mission. The most of everybody else would hang back with Glob. And, of course, Glob wants to go in. He's a blank slate. He wants to learn everything. He's like, I want to go in. They're like, oh, no, not quite yet. So, they kind of try to describe to him what the situation, because everything's covered with mushrooms and soil and plants and the whole grove. And, it's basically sacred, if not in a religious sense, then in a very life of the colony sense to the myconids. This whole grove and the tending of the soil and the mushrooms and the fungus and all this stuff. So they wanted to be respectful of that. So a couple of them went in and they encountered after a brief time. And what I did is I kind of drew out a general outline of the grove on a map, but I didn't fill it in. I'm kind of doing a fog of war kind of thing. So as they progress in it, we draw in more detail. And I said, they can kind of see to the other end. And so I drew out a general outline, the big, huge fungus tower over in the other cavern that connects to the main grove cavern. And so as they went in, I was filling in details. It's reading the flavor text from the book, just dense fungus forest, really. And they encountered finally some myconids. And the myconids have circles. You have like the circle of explorers, circle of hunters, the circle of masters. I think there's like 7 circles, if I remember right. Yeah, circle of explorers, circle of masters, circle of hunters. There's a couple of other, there's like the circle of like farmers kind of thing. I don't know if it's exactly called that, but there's several circles and you kind of grab, circle of growers. There's an inner circle. And so there's a couple things you need to know about the myconids. One is the entire colony, is kind of one big organism, but it's not a hive mind or anything like that. They're just very close. They have this thing called the melding where and there it goes. Which cat was that? Which cat was that? I don't know. Hold on, I'm going to set it back up because I'm crazy like that. So they've got these circles which meet at mounds, and the mounds are basically sort of soil and I think kind of like gravel and stuff, and then it's covered with fungus and other stuff, and it's just this mound. And each of these circles that have different duties, professions, not quite the right word, within the colony, they kind of hang out at these circles. But then the overall colony will meld together and share their dreams and thoughts and all this stuff. And it doesn't quite say how long that lasts, the melding. Again, if anybody knows this, maybe from previous lore or source book stuff for the myconids, but it almost implies that they sleep. So maybe they meld before they sleep, or maybe their sleep is melding. But there's a certain time of the day where everybody melds. And one of the things that's happening that is troubling some of the myconids is that used to everybody melded together in the entire colony. And here recently, some of the leadership is trying to change it that you only meld with your own circle. And they've created a new circle called the Circle of Masters, which each leader of a circle is part of that. So there's a little bit of, even though when you're there, it's everybody's very friendly. People are happy. They're like, oh, there's cool things coming. There's joy coming, a new joy. There's also pretty big hints among the myconids that something isn't quite right. And I think I misplayed this. I mis-DM'd it, if that's a good way to put it. Myconids are not suspicious by nature. So even if they think something's wrong, they're not necessarily like humans or whatever and be like, assume the worst or something diabolical's going on. They'll just be kind of confused and not quite understand. Um, and I overplayed the the different views in the community, like as one is obviously sinister and one is not. Um, and it just says right out, like it gives you the notes that myconids. It says role playing the myconids. Yeah, innocent about matters of ethics and morality. Their lives centered on living fully each day and worrying little about the future and nothing at all about the past. So there's one myconid that the party has discussions with that really kind of goes into morality. There's bad things happening here. So I don't know how to resolve that. But I overplayed, instead of letting things kind of build and then, reveal like, hey, you're totally safe, this is great, you're good, and then just kind of things let build a little bit. The first conversation that the characters ended up having with the sovereigns, there's two leaders of this colony. One of them is under the influence of a demon lord, the other one isn't. And the one that's under the influence of the demon lord is trying to change how things go in the colony, and the other sovereign is resistant to that. But the very first discussion meeting that the players had with these two sovereigns, I really feel like there's amazing joy coming, and it very came across something creepy was happening, and he was like, oh, you need to meet, the bringer of joy. You'll meet her tomorrow, and deflecting questions and all this stuff. And I don't know how to do it. Maybe it's hard to present it as innocent and non-threatening given what's going on. But it seems to me, upon reflection, after I led the characters through the intro to Neverlight Grove, that I overplayed it. Now, one of the things that worked against me was that one of the players did a sense motive check on. There's two sovereigns. Let me find the two sovereigns here. There's Sovereign Philo, and the myconids establish who the bosses are by whoever's biggest. So Sovereign Philo is very big. He has multiple mushroom caps and all this stuff. But he's enthralled to Zugtmoy. And the other one is Sovereign Basidia. And but he's free of Zugtmoy's influence, Demon Lord Zugtmoy. But he's suspicious of Philo, or it's suspicious. I don't know if there's really gender. I don't think there's gender among the myconids. So it's suspicious of the other sovereign. So one of my players, while this discussion was going on, he was like, "Oh yeah, I want you to meet, I can't even remember. What is it? He wants them to meet the great cedar who lives beyond the garden. The beyond the garden is kind of over by that big fungus tower, and he keeps using she and her because myconids have no concept of gender. This is unusual. This unusual speech is further indication of Philo's madness. However, the sovereign dodges any questions about who the great cedar actually is, saying it's important for the characters to experience her firsthand. He's like, I'll take you to meet her tomorrow. So I don't know how you present all that without making it sinister and creepy, but I feel like I was too heavy-handed on it, and the characters right off the bat, the players were like, yep, something's wrong here, just immediately seizing on that. But part of what led against me was that one of the players did a sense motive check on Philo while he was like, oh, so wonderful, and he's being genuinely friendly. They're really happy that they brought, or it's being genuinely friendly, that they brought Stool, the little myconid sprout, back to them. Genuinely happy to see them, being very friendly, genuinely, hey, what's going on? So you've got to balance that with, man, they're really being nice to you, like really nice, not just crocodile smiles kind of, but, nice. But yet there's something creepy going on. Now, I had a player do a sense motive check and rolled really well, like a 21 or something like that. So what I said was, you don't really get if Philo's being disingenuous with you or not, but it says right in the book that Basidia, if somebody does a sense motive or something like that, can tell that Philo is, or if they do an insight, that's what they did. They did an insight check. Could tell that Basidia is uncomfortable with Philo's behavior. So since they rolled so well and they were both talking to both sovereigns at the same time, I went ahead and gave them that. I said, well, you can tell Basidia is kind of uncomfortable with uh, Philo's behavior, the other sovereign. But see, I mean, even that could be, is he just embarrassed because he's being so effusive or, so you got to meet the great cedar, or is he, is there something really bad going on here? And another thing with the insight, I went, because they rolled so well, I said, well, since you've been around Stool so long, you've never heard Stool talk in terms of gender, but yet Philo is talking in terms of gender to the great cedar, she and her and all that stuff. So anyway, they twigged pretty quick that something was up. Now, what happens is Basidia offers to give the players a tour of the grove, uh, this day, and then the next day they're supposed to go meet the great cedar or whatever. Now, the whole reason Basidia does that is because he wants to get the players alone so that he can say, if I were you, I wouldn't stick around. We had another group come here recently, and they were invited to meet the great cedar, and we haven't seen them since. Which, again, is hard for me to reconcile against their innocent nature without going, they don't go big into ethics and all that. So I don't know how to present that. It seems almost diametrically opposed, but just do the best you can. Now, when it came back to Stool, the first circle that the players encountered was the circle of hunters. Now, the hunters don't actually go kill creatures. What they do is they find creatures that have died, and they take them to the sovereigns, and the sovereigns reanimate the creatures. And then eventually the creatures are allowed to die and become part of the soil and all that, and part of the ecosystem circle of life in the grove. So, they were like, hey, what do we do? They explained this initial scout party, met them, had a friendly conversation. Stool was ecstatic to be back with myconids. And the leader of the circle of hunters, Lubamoob, they talked to it, and basically explained the deal with the gelatinous cube. And Lubamoob said, well, I will go talk to the circle of explorers, because the circle of explorers deal with, they go out and deal with unusual things and find out what we can do. So the players went back, or one of the players went back, got the rest of the group, and I think they left Shushar and Eldith, the NPCs, with Glob, the sentient gelatinous cube, and said, hold on, they're trying to figure something out. So anyway, long story short on that, the circle of explorers absolutely, that leader wanted to learn more about Globagul. So they worked out a path that had the least destruction possible to lead him to the circle of explorers, and that mound and circle was where Globagul would hang out while they're in the Neverlight Grove. So other things to mention, I would really familiarize yourself before you take people to Neverlight Grove with the different mounds and the circles and how they work. Familiarize which leaders are under Zuktmoy's influence and which aren't. Kind of think ahead of how you want to role play all this, how heavy-handed or, knock players over the head or be very subtle about what's going on. Like I said, in my case, I've already blown it completely. They know that everything's just something ain't right at all. In fact, Basidia asked them for their help. There's this thing called the Garden of Hope, which is the area before you get to the big fungal tower. And he wanted them to go, he basically gave them a quest to say, would you go check this out for me? So they're trying to figure out how to get up there before the next day. They don't want to just go there when Philo wants to take them. They asked, how do I, they did ask, hey, do you know how to get us out of the Underdark? There's a whole section in this chapter that talks about, if you ask that, then the sovereigns were like, we don't know what to tell you. But the Basidia, the reason there's two sovereigns is there's usually just one sovereign, which is Philo. But Basidia's group was on kind of a pilgrimage. They were kind of nomads, and they ended up at Neverlight Grove, and Philo and that crew brought them in. This was before Philo and, some of the myconids started going, doo, doo, because of the Demon Lord's influence. So one of the clues that Basidia says is like, the travel, when we were on our pilgrimage, the travelers that we found from the surface world mostly merchants on their way to or from Blingdingstone, Gracklestug, or Menzoberranzan. So that's a pretty big hint. This is how you can get out. And the players are already talking about going to Blingdingstone, which is fine with me because I'd like to get them to Blingdingstone and then have a few adventures there. And then there's a midpoint. At the midpoint of Out of the Abyss, they can actually go up and get to the surface and then come back later. So, I think I'm glad to have seeded that hint. And there's another leader, a circle leader, one of the explorers, tells them that, I will help you get to the Garden of Hope. And I'll also, if you help us, because he's also not under the influence of Zuctamoy and is with Basidia, it's like, if you help us figure out what's going on, when you leave here, I'll be your guide. And Shushar's like, that would be, that's good for Shushar because the further they get away from the Dark Lake region district, all that, the less Shushar knows how to guide. And to get to Blingdenstone is not one of the areas he knows. So, there is also the Circle of Hunters gives a couple of quests if the characters want to. He mentioned it. Um, Said, hey, the Sovereigns maybe will let you stay here if you, there's a Grick. And then a shambling mound they're having problems with. I didn't come right out and say shambling mound. I did say Grick, but I just said there's some creature that's interfering with the soil, and that's actually a shambling mound. And the characters may or may not go after that. It was kind of presented to them as, hey, if you help out, maybe the Sovereigns will be more friendly for letting you stay. But the Sovereigns were like, yeah, you can stay as long as you want. Yeah, it's great, especially Philo, because he wants to take them to the Great Cedar the next day. So then I kind of narrated. I just took the characters around. Basidia, asked them to. He said, "Hey, if you help us out, I'll give you some treasure." And he gave them I think, a scroll as a kind of a token of good faith. Hey, we're friends. And he kind of took them around and introduced them to all the different circles and the leaders and what they do and all that stuff. So that was pretty much how it went. One other thing that they did query Basidia on the other group. And he's like, you kind of all look the same, because like, what race were they? And they're like, you kind of look the same to me. And then they, through kind of trial and error and asking what I felt were pretty good questions, it finally determined, yes, it was drow. So there's a drow hunting party that was sent here, or scouting party, to look for the characters by Elvara. And they have met a very nasty fate, which we will find out about next session more than likely. I'm trying to think if there's anything else worth discussing. The other thing, I had a character ask me, or I had a player ask me, do they have written records? And I finally determined I don't think that, because they do everything through rapport, spores and all that. And I said I really don't think they have a library or written records of any of that kind. And the other thing they asked is, said, do they have literal eyeballs? I have no idea. And he's got some reason for asking. So I did my best. I read the monster manual entry, and then I looked at the artwork and everything. I said, I think they do have eyeballs, fungal eyeballs. They got dark vision and regular vision, and I don't see that they're blind or anything like that. And the artwork makes it look like they have eyeballs. So if somebody knows different, feel free to comment on this video. So that was kind of, I think I ended up still doing a standard length video, even with all that. I hope this is helpful. It's Neverlight Grove is a nice little encounter. We'll probably be here 2 or 3 sessions, I would imagine. But yeah, definitely prep on this one, because there's a lot of different NPCs you can interact with. You need to know who's on which side. And definitely in advance, try to prepare yourself for how you present intrigues among a race of beings that are very innocent and don't have a sense of ethics. And I think, how did it put it? Ethics and morality. So, anyway, thanks so much for watching the Shane Plays Out of the Abyss Notes series. Please leave this video a thumbs up and a like on YouTube. That helps me a lot. And please leave it a comment. I'd appreciate that very much.